I'm Nathan,
I'm Enrique.
I'm Kenny.
and we're doing our presentation on microfarm urbanization. So, did you know that 40% of California's water usage per year goes to typical agriculture? That's 15.2 billion gallons of water per day. And approximately 8% of California's energy usage goes to the same kind of agriculture. So, our group came together and we wanted to ask one question. Is there a way to lower these statistics? And we found out that microfarms can do that. So, you're probably wondering, what are microfarms? Well, microfarms are small-scale farms that take place in urban or suburban areas, usually on less than 5 acres of land. And they typically look a little bit like that, right? They're really small, they can be implemented in really small lots, could be bigger lots too, but it's really easy to deploy in urban environments, right? So, when we came together for this project, we wanted to come up with a list of goals for our research, right? Specifically, we wanted to be able to inform the public about the current and potential future benefits microfarms in their urban environments have, both economically and environmentally. And we wanted to be able to suggest to people whether or not we could start adopting these ideas and paradigms into San Jose itself. So, how were we going to be able to do this research? Well, we split it up in 3 different topics, right? Public incentives, ecological impact, and current designs and processes.
So the first subtopic is public incentives. So we examined numerous case studies about real-life microfarm implementations, and typically the trend that we observed is that governments that passed supporting legislation that helped microfarming saw better success. And then the most important case study that we found was by Professor Othman in 2018. And basically he examined microfarming as a whole and the well-being towards the urban population within the country of Malaysia. And you might be asking, why Malaysia? Well, if you don't know, Malaysia actually has an issue with food security, which is a really important issue there. And this is because of the rapid increase in urban population and the stagnant food production. And back in the 1990s, the Malaysian government actually enacted a series of urban farming programs in order to help this crisis. So the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Standards in Malaysia passed the Malaysian Standard, MS, 1784, which is also known as the Good Agriculture Practice. Basically, this law was basically a package of a standardized sets of rules which microfarms would basically have to follow in order to be legally compliant. And then the other important aspect of this is they were able to distribute free communal land. So this is land that would be dispersed throughout the urban area in order to set up microfarms. And then another key statistic within this was that Professor Othman found that 83.2% of the users within the Sabang Jaya Malaysian district were of a lower income group according to the standards set by the Malaysian government. And over here you can see all the public incentives and the motivating factors and impacts. You can see here on the next slide where it's summarized that users of the urban farms, so people of this lower income class, had numerous benefits such as cash income, healthy lifestyle because they knew exactly what was in their food, social bonding, they had an extra source of food, and then basically this was all the result from the government legislation and the incentives this had for the people.
So we kind of touched on, the incentives that you might have as an individual. But what are the incentives that microfarms have? What are the effects that it will have ecologically, right? So, to be able to answer this, we need to see how the efficiency of microfarms can benefit the environment. Specifically, the efficiency in water and the efficiency in energy. So, looking at water, traditional farming, how is watering techniques used there? We typically see sprinkler and drip irrigation systems, but they waste a ton of water. specifically between 56 and 80% of the water that is used in these systems are wasted, or are actually absorbed by these plants' root systems. So why are they so inefficient? Well, by a study done by Berkby in 2016, 20% of the water used in sprinkler systems don't even reach the soil. So a lot of this water is just getting accumulated on the actual leaves of the plants, and they get evaporated. Or the water is just thrown out into the air and it's brought out by the breeze and it doesn't even reach the root system, right? So with sprinkler systems, we see a huge waste of water in the fact that we're just throwing it in the air. But what happens to, the water that does get to the ground? Or systems that use, drip irrigation that just directly puts it into the soil, right? Well, we see with soil-based growing mediums, only 70% of the water is absorbed by the root system. And that's typically because the actual soil takes that water and it just holds it, retains it, and keeps it away from the root system itself. So how can we combat this? Well, microfarms typically have more efficient techniques. And they use an incredibly less amount of water than other, traditional irrigation techniques. They, on average, use 90% less water. So you're probably wondering, well, how are they so efficient? Well, they're efficient because of the design. And you can see here with this diagram, microfarms typically use hydroponic or aeroponic systems. An aeroponic system is right here, hydroponic system is right here. Now, there are two key aspects that make this so much more efficient. First aspect is the fact that we have reuse of water, right? So all these systems always have some water flowing back in there. We have, mist from nozzles going back into the water pump over here, and we have an overflow drain with a hydroponic system where all the water gets accumulated here, and any excess water that's in there for too long just goes straight back into the water pump. And nutrients is put into these as well. Now the other thing, as stated before, soil is a big factor. It retains a lot of water, and a lot of that water does not go into the actual root system. So with these systems, what happens is they just eliminate the need for soil-based mediums entirely. We just put the plant in usually, coconut like fibers, or just straight into the water itself, and it grows just fine as long as the nutrients is there. So all that water waste from the soil, all that water waste from just throwing it into the air is completely eliminated with this kind of stuff. So that's how it's efficient with water. How does this affect the environment? How is this good for the environment? Well, basically, more water that we're going to be able to have from, all the water that we saved from these systems means that we don't have to drain as much water from reservoirs, and we don't have to drain as much water from rivers. And in general, not having to drain these resources is good for the environment. But specifically, it's better because the wildlife that is sustained in these environments, in these rivers, in these reservoirs, are going to be able to better sustain themselves. So that's how it can help the environment with water efficiency. So how does it help the environment with energy efficiency? Well, this comes down to the energy usage from transporting crops. So how much energy is used when transporting crops? Well, a truckload of crop is on average traveling 1,500 miles. And within this 1,500 miles, the amount of energy that is being used is the equivalent to running a refrigerator for 3.5 months. This is an incredible amount of energy, right? So how are our microfarms more efficient? Well, it's not necessarily the design that these microfarms are based on that makes them more efficient. It's more the fact that they are located in areas where they're just directly distributed in the same city. They don't have to transport these goods. So eliminating the need to transport these goods entirely makes them incredibly efficient in energy usage in that aspect. And it's so efficient that it's going to be the equivalent of taking 15,365 cars off the road in America alone. That's an incredible amount.
So one question to ask is, how are microfarming systems built today? And typically when you think about a typical farm, you think maybe a land with thousands and thousands of acres filled with fruits, vegetables, but an urban farm is small scale. Typically small scale, it can be scaled up to a couple acres. Um, it can be done in a backyard. It can be done in an apartment balcony, community gardens, and then basically the biggest approach towards urban farming is to plant as many crops as you can in the given possible space.
So for some common techniques for microfarms, these are the most efficient techniques to get the most yield out of the least space. Microcropping is one. It's planting crops in parallel rows to get the most crops as possible. Another technique is sustainable crops, which is whenever a crop uses little to no pesticides at all. And then the most important technique is to stop the use of fertilizers completely. Fertilizer is one of the biggest harms to our atmosphere, as it releases the most amount of greenhouse gases, which damages the ozone layer. We must use some alternatives for fertilizers, such as like manure or compost or like seaweed, to get our plants the nutrients they need to grow. Sustainability is one of the biggest microfarming aspects because it helps the fight of global warming. Thousands and thousands of acres of land use tons of fertilizers and pesticides each year, and this depletes our land from its natural nutrients, and this emits a lot of pollution. And for sustainability, the goal of it is to fulfill society's need of food without tampering any of future generations' ability to grow their own. Sustainability is also very important because it reduces emission by a lot, and it also introduces renewable energy. So for renewable techniques, this is an introduction of microfarming, as it introduces modern technology into our agriculture. So in 2012, agriculture consumed about 800 billion thermal units of energy, and the biggest consumers of energy in agriculture is refrigeration, heating, motors, and lighting, and this could all easily be replaced by renewable energy. As the cost of energy rises, farmers turn to use more renewable energy. Wind turbines and solar panels are one of the most used renewable energy sources, as it saves 378 tons of CO2 reduced yearly. Aquatic system is also a very efficient renewable technique because it uses our gray waters, which is like toilet water or sink water, to water our plants, and this saves a lot of energy because the water doesn't get filtered. So how do we further improve microfarms? A very efficient experiment that was used was Wong's experiment, and this was when Wong and his team used manure as an alternative to fertilizer. He uses the fertilizer compost to enrich the plants with nitrogen and nutrients, and this was successful because this was in Hong Kong, where a lot of animals were giving waste to the streets. So this manure can be used to use as fertilizer for the plants. And this technique is very inexpensive and is a healthy alternative. And I believe this is a good idea because it is an organic and environmentally friendly solution. Mm-hmm. So another very successful experiment for microfarming is Lee's experiment. And this one, he and his team were trying to implement a green world. With the rapid increase in households, well, there is also an increase in heat. So he and his team in Hong Kong, they implemented a cooling installation, which means that they tried to implement homes with green walls and green roofs to keep the cooling inside. And this would release less pollution because less energy will be used.
So, in conclusion, we found that microfarms are beneficial. They're beneficial in terms of socioeconomics, and they're also beneficial to the environment. And because of this, we believe that the city of San Jose should better implement microfarms. Thank you.